Hare Krishna. Part 3, 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and I don't have to tell you that the answer is the perfection of renunciation. And we're going through three different topics, verses 41 to 48, which will be worshipping Krishna with one's own work. The second part is transiting from Jnana Yoga to Bhakti Yoga, because ultimately this last 6 chapters, if you remember, is about Jnana Yoga, metaphysics, and the verse 56 to 60. So we're covering 20 verses again. That's work in devotion, or rather work in pure devotion. Really, really important verses, phenomenal amount of very valid information. And we're going to start with verse 41, in which Krishna now is talking about work, how we can attain perfection by work, or that is how we can work properly. And this can be quite controversial. He starts off, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras are distinguished by the qualities born of their own natures in accordance with the material modes, O chastiser of the enemy. This is a fourfold division of society, which is unfortunately wrongly known as the caste system. Today, this mention of this word caste doesn't exist anywhere in either Bhagavad Gita or Vedic literature. This is an English concoction. But the natural division, according to how? According to the modes of material nature. And we finished, I think, the last verse. Krishna says, no being existing here or amongst the demigods who is freed from the modes. Everybody is under the modes of material nature. That means, according to your nature, you have a specific quality of work. And now Krishna is going to describe these 4 different qualities. Those in the mode of goodness, those in the mode of passion, those in the mode of mixed passion and ignorance, and those who are in the mode of ignorance. Peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities by which Brahmins work. Brahmins are the intellectual class. These are those who are in the mode of goodness, and we've already spoken about the qualities of goodness. That means people whose main purpose is liberation and advancing towards perfection. When I talk about intellectual class, I'm not talking about scientists, speculative philosophers, educators, and so on. I'm talking about people who know the difference between the body and the soul, and who know that God is a supreme person. That's where intellectual starts. Okay, then Krishna talks about leaders, and here's what quality of a leader: heroism, power, determination, resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, and leadership are the natural qualities of work for Kshatriyas. You notice that there's no mention here that leaders should be barristers, solicitors, or lawyers, which is what they usually tend to be. But 2 really good qualities are here. One is that they have leadership qualities, and the other is courage in battle. That means that a leader goes out in battle. He just doesn't tell others to go out. He goes out, he leads them, and he says, follow me. Then, the next 2, farming, cow protection, and business are the natural work for Vaishyas. This is for the mercantile class. And for Shudras, there's labor and service to others. So Krishna then says, by following these qualities of work, every man can become perfect. So very interesting. In other words, everyone has a nature. You have a nature. You work according to your nature, rather than according to someone's nature. And Krishna is going to be explaining that later. And that's where you can attain perfection. Now, how can that be done? It means that you worship the Supreme Lord. Whatever your nature is, you're engaged in worshiping the Supreme Lord. And how do you worship Krishna? By your work. you give up the results of your work. Whatever it is that you're doing, you're offering the results of your work. You work without detachment, and you just depend on the Supreme. So Krishna now says a very interesting thing. He says it's better to engage in your own occupation, even though you don't do it well, than to engage in another's occupation, even if you do it well. And now that's very different than the world that we live in today, where anyone can do anything. But here Krishna says, no, even if you can do anything, act according to your own nature, because that is the structure of society. And as soon as you introduce this thing, that liberality, anyone can do anything, then you turn the natural order upside down on its head. What happens when you work like that? When you act according to your nature, you become free from sinful reaction. In other words, you become purified, you become free of karma. Whereas if you work the other way, you don't become free of your karma. Why? Because you're acting against the laws of nature. So, all right, but even if I don't do something very well, Krishna says, never mind. In any case, every endeavor, no matter how well you do it, is always covered by some type of fault. But you should not give up that type of work which is born of your own nature, even if it's full of fault. So Krishna therefore says, one who is self-controlled, unattached, disregards material enjoyment, can obtain by practice of renunciation the highest perfection of, the highest perfect stage of freedom from reaction. So Krishna is summarizing, and now he's talking about freedom from reaction. We're entering into this realm of jnana. So Krishna is talking about how to go from working for him to the stage of when you're free from reaction, then you really start to become absorbed in understanding the higher principles of life. And Krishna then, the cover of this book is in the way. Krishna's then talking about how one achieves this perfectional stage by acting in the proper way. And I'm going to read a lengthy verse here that Krishna talks about the mode of conduct in which one should always be working so that the actual purification of consciousness takes place. Being purified by his intelligence, controlling his mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, being freed from attachment and hatred, one who lives in a secluded place, who eats little, who controls his body, mind, and power of speech, who is always in trance, and who is detached, free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, free from all proprietorship and peaceful. Such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. So knowing your spiritual identity is something that we've talked about throughout the last 18 chapters, is knowing that you're spirit soul. So Krishna says, work according to your nature, cultivate these qualities, and you will come to the realization, not just theoretical, but you will come to the realization that you're not this body. And that stage is called Brahmabhuta. And when you realize that you're not this body, then Brahmabhuta Pashanatmana Sochati Nakangshati Samasarveshu Bhuteshu Magdaktim Labhyate Param. That is when one becomes qualified to practice bhakti or pure devotion. So work leads to self-realization. I'm spirit soul, and self-realization ultimately gives facility for pure devotion. Now Krishna summarizes how to then act in bhakti, because the activity continues, but it's the consciousness by which activity is performed that is changing. And Krishna says, if you act in pure devotion, then you can understand Krishna. And it's only by acting in pure devotion that Krishna can be understood. And when you understand Krishna, then you can return to your original spiritual realm. In verse 56, Krishna says, someone who acts in this way, always thinking of Krishna, depending on Krishna, then he attains perfection. How? And Krishna introduces a new element of yoga, his grace. He says, Shashvatim padam avyayam mat prasadat, my prasad, my mercy. In other words, it's not just by effort, but you need to have grace. And this is something that now becomes a recurring feature of the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita, that we realize that it doesn't matter just how hard you practice yoga. You need to have the grace of the Supreme. Otherwise, you just can't kick down the door to perfection. So now Krishna says the following: in all activities, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. He says three things: depend on me, work always under my protection, and be fully conscious of me. We depend on Krishna for results. We see that, yes, Krishna is always taking care of me, and therefore I'm always under his protection. And we do sadhana or spiritual practice so that we're always conscious, because unless you're conscious, you can't be thinking in these ways. And we now conclude. Krishna now says what happens when we do act like this, and he also says what happens when we don't act. If you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. Again, here we have mat prasadat, by my grace or mercy. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So it's a standard format in the verses of the Bhagavad Gita where we have one and then its alternative, or one proposition or its contrast, the positive and the negative. So Krishna says, be conscious of me. That's how he ended up the previous verse. If we're always conscious of Krishna, we will pass over the obstacles. And it's very interesting. Krishna doesn't say there won't be obstacles. He says there will be plenty of obstacles because we're in this world, and the world is full of obstacles. But by Krishna's grace, we will be able to overcome these obstacles. But if we're not conscious, if we do not do regular sadhana, if we not practice yoga properly, and in the ways that's been outlined in the Bhagavad Gita, then we're not going to be able to act in consciousness of Krishna. And Krishna then says, you're acting in false ego. So again, the misconception that I'm this body. Then you'll be lost. In other words, we will lose our way back to our spiritual destination. Very good words. And now we're going to end with the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita at our next session, which really, really requires both close attention, note-taking, and following in your Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna.